Okay, that's 2 p.m. So too sharp. So we will stick with our timeline. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining CanCham Thailand's webinar on Thailand post-COVID-19 economic outlook. First of all, I would like to thank you, our generous annual partners, for their ongoing support. So first of all is Bombardier, Lefco, and My Internship Asia, International School of Bangkok, ISB, Trend Digital, Ally Pickford, Magna Automotive Thailand, MBMG Groups, and Privileges Cards. Apart from this, I would like to thank you, our chamber partners who help us promote this event, EABC, Europeans, JFCCT, Netherlands, and Singaporeans. For the formats of this webinar, speaker will provide 15-minute presentations on their topics, followed by panel discussions and Q&A. If you have any questions, you may want to keep them until the Q&A sessions or type into the chat box, so our moderator can direct the question to the speakers. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. David, Vice President at CanCham Thailand and Consul at Chandler and MHM. David will be the MC and moderator during the panel discussions. David, the stage is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Jen. I really appreciate the introduction, and thanks very much to everybody for joining us this afternoon. I hope you're looking forward to the discussion as much as I am. You know, when this event came up in the calendar, I think it was for me personally, I think it was just, you know, how to make sure I can block off my schedule to make sure that I'm there to watch these two speakers. So I'm sure we're going to learn a lot, you know, from both Dr. Kirida and Dr. Hardy as well. So our first speaker today is Dr. Kirida Baopichit. Dr. Kirida joined the Thailand Development Research Institute, or TDRI, which is a leading think tank in Thailand, in 2015. She is currently the director of TDRI Economic Intelligence Services, or EIS, which is TDRI's corporate membership program. Dr. Kirida leads the preparation of content for the monthly seminars for corporate members on issues that are of high relevance and interest for businesses. Her specialization spans monitoring and analyzing developments of the global and Thai economies, which includes the business environment, demographic changes, and technological development issues. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the stage over to Dr. Kirida and let her present on issues relating to post-COVID-19 here in Thailand, and I'm sure globally as well. Dr. Kirida, over to you.
Thank you so much, David, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to meet you today, and hopefully in the future, we'll be able to meet personally as well. I have just prepared a few slides, and as Kunjan mentioned, that I have 15 minutes, so I will go through them pretty quickly so that we have time for panel discussion and also Q&A. So I will start sharing my screen, and I'm still not able to share my screen. So if just a second, it says host disable participant screen sharing. So if you could add me as a host or enable my screen sharing, that would be great. But while we wait for that, I'll just tell you what the key messages of what I've planned to to say today are. Well, first of all, one of the key messages is that we're going to be living with the COVID pandemic for a very long time. And very long time here, I mean about, at least until the end of next year. That's because we'll still have to wait for the vaccine to come out. It has to then be manufactured and then distributed and then vaccinated to at least 60 or 70% of the population before economic activities will come back, because people have confidence to come out and do their normal economic activities, such as going to places, tourism, or other things. So it would take the earliest until the end of next year before this is under control. But of course it could last longer than that. So we're gonna be here for a long haul, and we really have to adjust for that. And in addition to adjusting for that, we'll probably also have to think of what the post-COVID world will be like. And so we can then start planning now for the post-COVID world as well. I know it's a bit early, but I know it's going to be useful to start planning on early. So with that, I have prepared a few slides. Let's see if I can share them now. Yes, I can. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, it's going to take a while before all this is going to be back to normal. And here, when I say back to normal, I do not mean the economic activities will be back to normal, because when things are under control, it will still take a few more months, or at least up to a year, before economic activities go back to 2019 levels, because a lot of businesses, a lot of people have severe economic problems at the moment. So even the pandemic is under control, it will take time before the people or businesses can pick themselves up and start economic activities to the level of 2019. So we're going to be in this for quite a long time. Actually, countries are starting to unlock, because it's obvious that they can't last very long with the total lockdown. So many countries are beginning to unlock, but as I mentioned to you, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to go back to 2019 levels anytime soon. And of course, a possibility of a second or third wave of the contagion, might come. So there's always that fear as well. So as I mentioned earlier, that it's going to be quite painful. This is the World Bank's forecast that just came out actually 2 days ago. And it's actually worse than what the IMF had said earlier. The world economy this year, for example, will contract by around 5%. With advanced economies contracting by 7% and developing markets contracting by 2.5. And that's because China is part of what they call the developing markets or emerging markets. And China, as you can see on this map, is the only big economy that will still be able to grow this year, albeit very low, only 1%. While we earlier, if you remember, at the beginning of the year, we had expected China to grow this year by almost 6%. So it's it's a sharp slowdown, but it's still growth. Whereas all other regions of the world will experience negative growth. For Thailand, I would say if our economy contract by 10% this year, I would not be surprised. And here I'm saying this because I benchmark with the Tom Yum Goong crisis in 1997, 1998. And at that time, the Thai economy contracted by almost 8%. And as you know, this time it's much worse. It's not only Thailand, it's the whole world. All our export markets are affected, all our tourism markets are being affected. So, this is a much bigger crisis than the Tom Yum Goong crisis. So as I mentioned, if the Thai economy were to contract up to 10%, I wouldn't be surprised. So we're going to be, in this for a while. It's going to be quite painful. Of course, next year, it will look as if things, are better because the lockdowns have been relaxed. But again, as I mentioned to you, it will look better vis-a-vis, versus the lockdown, but it won't look better compared to 2019. So we're going to be, in this situation for a while, at least, a year and a half or 2 years. Right. So another thing that happens when global demand falls is the crude oil prices also comes down. So here again, we are going to see low oil prices this year. I think the Energy International Agency has forecasted that oil prices will be around 50% lower than last year. It will start recovering. From its trough in April. As you can see now, oil prices are rising, but it won't go back to the levels of 2019. So here again, it's not good for oil exporting economies like the Middle East, who are, by the way, also our export markets. But it's good in the overall for Thailand because we are a net oil importer. So now we're able to import oil at a lower price. So that's actually a benefit for Thailand. I know a lot of you are interested also in how the baht would move, because that's something that is also affected by the global economy as well. And actually, as you can see, in the beginning of the year, actually the baht has started depreciating along with other currencies in the region. So for example, the baht has been around 30 baht per US dollar in last quarter of 2019. And in the first quarter, it was 31 baht. And then it became sort of 32 baht, after that. But now it seems to have been strengthening a little bit now to about 31 and a half. So all in all, we see that the baht will be weaker than last year. It won't go back to 30 baht or below 30 baht, but it will probably be around 31 to 33 baht per US dollar. And this is not just my projection. This is actually the projections of different houses and different agencies in the world, which consensus forecast has collected and computed the average. So this is sort of like the market consensus of how the baht would be. So this is what the market expects the baht to be. So if you look at the baht compared to other currencies in the region, the market actually expects that the baht will depreciate this year more than other currencies in the region, because it's obvious that Thailand is heavily affected not only from exports, as other countries are, but also from our heavy reliance on international tourism as well, which Mario can speak on it more later. This is one of the reasons why the market thinks that capital inflows into Thailand this year will be less than last year and less than what other countries will get. So the baht will be weaker than other currencies, except for Indonesia, which is more heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic than Thailand. So that's the global story. And how does it affect Thailand? So as I mentioned to you initially, that of course Thai exports are heavily affected. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if exports this year contracts by 10%. Well, I mean, if you look at the export numbers so far, except for gold, everything else has contracted, and it has contracted in most major markets that Thailand exports to, right? I mean, Japan, EU, ASEAN, USA. It has contracted in the past few months, except for the U.S. In the data that we have, the U.S. Market is still expanding, and that's because we also export in place of China. When China had a lockdown, a lot of the American exporters had turned to Thailand to import goods that they had imported from China before. So we had that benefit as well. But going forward, as China has relaxed its lockdown and it's now starting to export, this might not go on for a very long time. But other markets, as you see, they're all in the red. So this is again, an impact that we already see, and it will probably hit us throughout the year. Of course, other than Thai exports, which is around 50% of the Thai economy or of Thai GDP, we have tourism, which is international tourism that brings money into our country. And this is around 12% of GDP. So it's not as big as exports of goods, but it's still a sizable amount. And as you can see now, and of course, again, Mario will talk more about this, that we have actually, since the lockdown, we have actually seen a nosedive of international tourist arrivals, right? It's almost zero at the moment. I mean, arrivals in April into international airports in Thailand has dropped by almost 100%. And of course, there is now talks about relaxation, travel bubbles, allowing short-term business trips to, to happen. I mean, that's still in the initial stages. So, it will be relaxed, more and more. But again, we expect that international tourist arrivals this year, for example, will contract by 80 to 90%. So, that 12% of GDP that we used to have, it will be almost all gone. So that's a big impact as well. It also affects other sectors that are related, right? So which businesses are affected most? Of course, just from tourism that has dropped. I mean, it has a very long supply chain. So, hotels, right, wellness and spas, airlines, even entertainment, tour companies, they're all affected. And here we have listed the businesses according to the size of employees. So as you can see, there's so many people who are affected as well. Right? In the hotel industry alone, there are, more than 1 million, 1 million people in this industry, right? And then of course, it also affects shopping malls or retail shops, from from the lower domestic demand, but also from the drop in tourism as well. So as you can see, malls, restaurants, they're also affected here. The ones that are not so much affected will be things like electronics, which is able to, as I mentioned to you earlier, export in place of China. And increasingly, China is becoming the electronics hub, especially for hard disk drives. And there are some businesses that actually benefit from the pandemic at the moment, right? As you know, e-commerce, any form, food, online marketplace, and anything that has to do with e-commerce, such as delivery and packaging, they're doing much better than last year. E-services, tutorial online, mobile banking, even we watch more of Netflix. That's all benefiting as well. Telecom services and even medical supplies, right? We care more about our health, now hygiene, so face masks, alcohol, medicines, even vitamins are selling like hotcakes these days, including Thai vitamins as well. Of course, food and insurance, because we are worried about our health. More and more people buy what they call this COVID-19 insurance as well. It's like it's really cheap. It's like 500 baht for a year, but a lot of people are willing to invest in buying this insurance, but the payout is still quite low at the moment. So insurance companies are still enjoying this, the benefit of this. So these are the businesses that are affected. And of course, as I mentioned to you, it affects a lot of people as well. So we actually looked at the number of people who are affected, because this affects the purchasing power as well. And as business people, we worry a lot about the purchasing power of people in the country, because we're not going to rely on, we are not able to rely on international tourists, at least for this year. And here, at TDRI, we computed that there will be around almost 10 million people who will be heavily affected, and they come from the sectors that I mentioned in my earlier slide. Retailers and even van drivers, taxi drivers, and anything that has to do with tourism, right, will be heavily affected. The services industry, basically. So around 10 million people will be highly impacted. And here, I mean, their incomes would fall quite a bit. And there are others, around 15.5 million people, will be moderately affected. And of course, the rest, doctors, nurses, civil servants, they are not very much affected. But the majority of the people are either moderately affected or highly affected. And this means that their incomes have been slumped pretty much this year. So with all this happening, of course, the next question is, so how much are they going to cut their purchasing power, right? So we sort of went through the list of things that people buy, and this is from the Thai socioeconomic survey that is done every year. And we sort of categorize goods that people can actually reduce 100%, or they can partially reduce, and those that they cannot reduce at all, and those that they're likely increase. And I will leave these slides with you so you can take a look at them. So there are things that people would probably reduce if they have less incomes. For example, repair of their houses that maybe can wait. Except if you really have money, you want to repair your house right now because you're working from home more. But normally, people can wait on this. So these are things that what we call they're non-essential. So you can wait a bit on that if you really don't have incomes. But there are also things that they will likely increase their consumption as well. Like fuel and water, cleaning supplies, basically, because people care a lot more about hygiene at the moment. And when there was a lockdown, of course, contraceptives and condoms were selling a bit better. But anyway, and of course, telephone and internet services as well. So these are things that people will buy, will buy either less of or might be able to reduce. So what we did with all this is we then try to compute, right? Try to quantify how much would that be, how much purchasing power would decline. And we found that, it will probably decline by around 65 billion baht per month. And we do it per month because if the lockdown is relaxed more and more, then this is not going to be, you know, as high as 65 billion. This was when we computed when there was a lockdown, you know, in Thailand. And of course, the way we computed it, just to give you a quick sense, is that we divided incomes, households into different income groups. The reason we had to do that because very low income household won't be able to cut down a lot of their consumption, because what they most consume are already necessities, and these are households which incomes less than 2,700 baht, right, or even less than 5,300 baht, you know, per person per month. They won't be able to cut down much, but those with higher, you know, incomes, they're able to cut down much more. And you know, when we computed all this, you know, we found that it's going to be around 65 billion baht a month, or around almost 0.5% of GDP per month. But as we relax the lockdown, right, I mean, this number will be less, but still, I mean, you know, for the whole year, we can expect, you know, consumption to probably fall by, you know, at least 4%. So that's a big number, because again, consumption is also around 50% of GDP. Domestic consumption is around 50% of GDP as well. So, you know, what then is left, right? You might ask. Everything else is down. So the only hope we have, the only engine we have hope on, is the government. And here I just want to mention that the Thai government, as you already heard a lot of the news, has agreed to borrow 1 trillion baht in order to stimulate the economy. And 1 trillion baht translates into around 6% of GDP. I mean, that's not a lot. I mean, given that, you know, the economic activities, you know, have fallen by so much, right? As I mentioned, you know, tourist arrivals have fallen by almost 100%, and exports have fallen by 10%. So, you know, increasing 6% of GDP is helpful, but it's not much. So a lot of people ask, can the government do more in the next few months? And the answer is yes. If they wish to borrow more and give more or stimulate the economy some more, they can, because 6% of GDP now puts our public debt to GDP level to only 48%. We can actually go up to around 60 or 65% of GDP. So that's around, you know, 1 to 1.5 trillion baht more that the government could borrow. But the more important question is what they do with that money, right? If they borrow and, you know, they're not using it actually for activities that are helping people, which is what the debate on the 400 billion baht part of the 1 trillion is all about now, right? That the government is going to do small investment projects in villages and communities, but are those actually going to give money to the community, or, you know, address the demand and issues of the communities and villages at the moment? That's the big question. But in terms of money, yes, there is money to increase if needed. And as I said here, you know, 6% GDP is not a lot, because if you look at other economies in the world, especially the big ones, I mean, some have already supported up to 45% of their, you know, of GDP, meaning the government has used money equivalent to 45% of GDP. I think Germany has used a lot, and I think the US is second. So Thailand is still small in terms of its fiscal stimulus at the moment, right? So now coming to the last part of what I wanted to share with you is that now that we know that we're going to be here for a long haul, and you know, the post-COVID world is going to come probably in 2022, probably 22, or the latter half of 2022. Many companies are already thinking ahead, right? I mean, they're adjusting, you know, for the moment, but they're already thinking ahead of the post-COVID world. And here, you know, I propose the word cap because it's easy to remember that, you know, companies are putting on their thinking cap. So at the moment, you know, a lot of companies are coping, right? Coping, especially in the beginning part of the pandemic, they were coping with the, you know, with the pandemic, you know, work from home, you know, trying to secure financing, you know, adjusting their supply chains because there were lots of disruption. But now, you know, 3 to 4 months, you know, after that, you know, we're in the adjusting phase at the moment, right? We're adjusting for the remaining 1.5 or 2 years. So, you know, new products are being thought about, right? New, you know, marketing strategies are being thought. You can't do the conventional type. You need to go more digital. Even property companies, right? Property developers are now selling their condominiums online, for example. So, a lot of adjusting, is being done at the moment, including supply chain management as well. But the important thing is many big companies are already thinking of the post-COVID world, and they're positioning themselves for that. So it's not only the new products that they think will sell well now, but what new products will serve the new demands, in the post-COVID world, where, people in the beginning might still, want some physical distancing. So for example, property developers are thinking hard now that, should condominiums, have a big lobby, right? Or maybe a smaller lobby, but bigger rooms, right? For the same price, for example, or co-working space, would they still be, as popular as before, or office spaces with work from home? Do we want to develop more office spaces? Or do we want to develop more single detached houses because people don't want to live in a congested place? So these are things, a lot of companies are thinking about, right? And of course, people are more health conscious, and this is supposed to be extravagant. So what happened to that? So basically, people will economize more. So, pricing will have to be a bit different as well in the post-COVID world. So these are a lot of things that, that companies think about. I just want to leave you with one other research that we have done, and that's the global supply chain, right? One of the things that will change a lot in the post-COVID world is the global supply. And the global supply chain has actually been nudged to shift for a long time. Natural disasters have been already shifting global supply chains, right? And shifting meaning either relocation, right? Or, importing from different sources, right? So there are these two main adjustments that firms have done. So when there was a natural disaster in the big floods in Thailand, the earthquake in Japan, many companies have already thought of relocating or thinking of new places to buy their raw materials. But then when the U.S.-China trade war broke out, I mean, that was another big push. And now the COVID-19 pandemic. And the biggest push is the push out of China, right? It's a push out of China because many companies are now realizing that they're relying too much on China. I mean, China has become the factory of the world, and it's cheap to produce there, but it also presents a lot of risk. So companies now are trying to balance cost effectiveness with risk management, and I think risk management has now stepped up in terms of importance, in this whole equation where companies should locate. So that we think the three models that will exist for supply chain management, global supply chain arrangement in the post-COVID world will be one, China for China, meaning that production for the Chinese market will remain in China, right? And its supply chain will remain in China. And it's good and cheap, so that's good, and it will cater to the Chinese market. But for markets outside of China, there will be more relocation or onshoring, meaning moving back to the to original country, or relocating, for example, from China to Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia is a prime location for relocation because it's close to China, and also it's not too expensive. Companies usually know the region well. If they're in China, they also sort of know of Southeast Asia as well. So this would be the model for relocation of production facilities. If you're not producing for the Chinese market, the tendency is to move out of China. And of course, the third model is diversification, meaning sourcing raw materials from different places now, not only relying on China, because the lesson learned this time is that, when anything happens to China, your production has to stop because most of your raw materials come from China. So that's the model that is going to happen in the post-COVID world. But of course, the second and third model will cost more, meaning that it will not be as cheap as producing in China, but you'll be able to manage your risk. So we might have to be prepared for higher prices, or cost management has to be more aggressive in the future. So that's the three models of global supply chain that we see. So we think these have opportunities for Thailand. Because this relocation, as I mentioned, out of China and diversification will benefit Thailand, because a lot of these relocation out of China will come to Southeast Asia. Yes, Vietnam will get most of the share, but Thailand will also get quite a bit, especially in the electronics sector as well. because 5G will be developed faster as well, because a lot of companies that come, they will need a lot of internet connection. And also now that the trend is going towards digital. So this is probably good for Thailand. But the risk, of course, remains that if there can be diversification to Thailand, for some industries like the auto industry, there might be diversification out of Thailand because it's quite concentrated here. Again, this is a risk that we see, and it was voiced by the automotive industry as well. And the other thing that we see is quite interesting is that, on the contrary to what most people think, that developing countries like Thailand will move quickly towards automation because of COVID-19, actually it might not. In developed countries, yes, because labor is scarce and expensive. But in developing countries like Thailand or Vietnam, with the COVID pandemic, capacity utilization, as you can see, has dropped, quite a bit. We're only at now 65% of capacity utilization. Labor has become, because lots of people are out of jobs now, they've become a bit cheaper. So, there is no need to move quickly towards automation as we had expected before. It will go towards automation, but the pace will not be as quick as we have earlier anticipated pre-COVID-19. So I think that's another interesting finding that we found. So, we think another opportunity that Thailand has is the food industry. And because of the COVID-19, it has proven that Thailand is pretty resilient in terms of being a food production hub of the world. We did not put a ban on our rice exports, unlike Vietnam or Cambodia or Myanmar. We were still able to export our meats. We did not face the African swine flu outbreak, which apparently has swept the whole region, including China. But Thailand sort of managed itself well and escaped it. So we're still able to export meat, especially pork, to the world. So I think that's another opportunity for Thailand in the post-crisis world as well. So I just like to end with that good note that we have opportunities as well, but we will probably have to last through this crisis for another year and a half or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirita. That was really, really comprehensive and really fascinating, really, really interesting material. So thank you very much for all of that. And I look forward to going over those slides in more detail afterwards, just to kind of pick up on all the points that I missed. But we'll get to the Q&A session later. So just to remind everybody, there's a Q&A and a chat function down at the bottom of the screen. So if you have a question for the panelists, please feel free to start writing them in, and we'll get to those during the discussion part. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, who is Dr. Mario Hardy. Dr. Hardy is a Chief Executive Officer at Pacific Asia Travel Association. He was appointed as a Chief Executive Officer at PATA, the not-for-profit membership association that catalyzes on the responsible development of travel and tourism within the Asia-Pacific region in November of 2014. He is the past chairman of the board of trustees of the PATA Foundation, a nonprofit organization with focus on the protection of the environment, the conservation of culture and heritage, and the support of education. So without further ado, Dr. Hardy, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing what you have to say about the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, everyone can see my screen? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Kirita. This was a really interesting presentation you just did. Actually, I've got so many questions for you. Really enjoyed it very much. Let me just explain a little bit more about who PATA is, just for a few seconds. As David mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization, but we're a little bit unique in the sense that we're actually both public and private sector. We have 99 government destinations around the world, ministries of tourism who are members of PATA, of course, Thailand is. and over 800 corporate members, businesses across the world. 40% of the 800 members are actually SMEs, small businesses. And the rest are actually mostly fairly large organizations operating in travel and tourism, from airlines, airports, hotels, tour companies, banks and insurance companies, tech companies, OTAs, pretty much any business that has any type of interaction with travel and tourism specifically. Our mandate is to look after the responsible and sustainable development of tourism to, from, and within Asia Pacific. PATA was actually born in 1961, so it's 69 years old this year. Not me, but the organization is, much younger than that. But the organization was founded in 61 in Hawaii with the sole purpose of actually promoting Asia as a tourism destination. So it was pretty much in one direction. Everyone traveling to Asia, coming to discover Thailand, Vietnam, and the rest of the region around here. Of course, over time, this actually developed into now what is today actually Asia is the largest outbound market to the rest of the world. Asia's traveling outside. And it now it's actually going in all sorts of directions. And in 1998, PATA actually relocated to Thailand. We are in the same office we've been since 1998 at Siam Piwat Tower. General Chamdan Chai, who used to be the first tourism ministers of Thailand, who actually owned this property, hosted PATA. He was also our chairman at the time, so very convenient. And actually welcomed PATA to relocate to Asia, because this is actually where the growth was happening at the time. So this is the reason why we're actually in Thailand. The question quite often people are wondering, why did we choose Thailand as opposed to other destinations across Asia? Because the growth was really happening around here. It was a good hub, a good center for us to connect to the rest of the world. We also have 75 plus universities around the world who are a member of the organization. And now we're reaching closely to 5,000 student members from across the world who interact with the organization too. Mostly in travel and tourism, as well as hospitality sector. So that kind of covers a little bit about who we are. Now let me actually talk about some tourism facts. Some of you will be aware of it. As it was mentioned earlier, the contributions to GDP on a global basis is 10.3%. Thailand, as you rightly mentioned before, is roughly about 12%. And so there are many destinations around the world. You can imagine small islands in the Pacific or the Caribbean, where actually the GDP contribution is in the 40, 60, sometimes even 80% contributions. So you can imagine in this current instances, in this situation we're in at the moment, these countries suffer enormously because essentially they're lost all of their income. There actually are 330 million jobs in travel and tourism. Obviously, this is pre-COVID-19. 1 in 10 jobs in the world are related to travel and tourism. And as Querida mentioned before, travel and tourism is way beyond just flights and hotels and tours. It's also all the ancillary services. So we at PATA tend to refer to this as the complete visitor economy, because the people who actually are farming, they're making a contribution to travel and tourism too. They're part of our travel economy. When there are less tourists, we need to produce less vegetables and fruit and meat and etc. They're also impacted. People working in the villages and community centers or making crafts for visitors, the elephant camps, of course, and other animal attractions around the country, they're also affected. The taxi drivers are affected. The tuk-tuk drivers are affected. Shopping malls, restaurants, and the rest of it too. So it is much more than just flights and hotels as most people actually think about. This current crisis, these numbers were actually probably just 2 months old now, was at the time estimated 5 times worse than the 2008 global financial crisis. I believe now it's actually significantly higher than this. And as you can see, I crossed off some numbers here on the chart because at the beginning of the crisis, in about 3 months ago now, the estimated impact on jobs that at risk within the travel industry was 75 million. It was then changed last month to 100 million. It was revised today to 197 million jobs at risk globally in terms of impact of the current crisis and moving forward as well. The financial impact was revised from 2.1 trillion to 2.7 trillion US dollars in terms of impact. So there is no doubt that this crisis is impacting everybody, but certainly the travel and tourism sector has suffered very much. These statistics are fresh out of the press. They came out only yesterday from one of our partners called Forward Keys. They actually monitor bookings. What is interesting about this company is actually they have what I would refer to as a crystal ball. They know the future. Most data companies in our sector actually tend to look at the past and estimate the future based on past results. Well, in this current situation, past results have actually zero meaning at this point because we've never experienced a situation like this before. So very, very difficult to estimate based on past experiences. Even SARS is a fraction of what actually we're currently living. Now, the reason this company has got interesting statistics is because they have access to all the future bookings. What are actually people booking in terms of their plans to travel overseas? Now, you can see the numbers are pretty much consistent across the globe. We have never seen, in my entire 30-year career, I've never seen any numbers like this before. Not as bad as this, but also being so consistent because of all the travel restrictions. None of us can travel anywhere. So 97.2% is the global average in terms of reductions in terms of arrivals in various countries around the world. I mean, you have to stop for a moment and think about this. 97.2%. There's barely anything left in terms of travel on a global basis at the moment. Asia is impacted 97.2, so exactly the same as the rest of it. So that's the global average in terms of what we're looking at the moment. This is comparing May last year to May this year. Now, here's the other statistics that are actually even more important. This is actually what the booking actually looks at the moment. So a very early stage introduction of China travel restrictions in January 6th, and we start to see the decline. It goes down and down and down into what the Lombardy COVID-19 outbreak in Italy hit by the worst case, and actually ended up being at the very bottom of it in terms of drops of bookings. It started to actually climb up again, and we're in May. We're almost looking like a V shape at the moment in terms of recovery. You may wonder why are the numbers actually negative below 100, and that's because actually people have actually canceled trips they had already planned before the crisis, in addition to actually the current bookings are actually not happening at the moment. So that's why you see negative figures below the 100 numbers. So it's not only there's no bookings at the moment or very few bookings, there have actually been cancellations or delayed bookings for many of the people who had booked before. Some actually are really have the intent to travel and are just pushing it back to much later in the year, to the third and fourth quarter. Others are saying, no, we're just going to try to get our money back if it's possible, and we'll try to book maybe later on when things actually recover. This is the current world map in terms of travel restrictions, pretty much restrictions everywhere still at the moment. Different levels of restrictions, obviously, as Europe is starting slowly to reopen for some in June, some in July, most of them in July. And the rest of the world is slowly actually trying to catch up with the reopening as well in terms of what's happening. So this is actually something I picked up from TripAdvisor earlier today, and I changed from the presentation I originally sent you, Jen. And because I thought it was actually really interesting in terms of understanding the stages of the recovery that we're actually going through. So initially, obviously decline, a massive decline in terms of travel. And then the second phase was the plateau, which is the potential travelers are staying inside. They're not actually going anywhere. They're flattening the curve. They're staying home. Third is actually the emerge out of the crisis gradually. People are going back out. They're going back to restaurants. They're going back to shopping malls within their city, their community, not so far beyond that. Fourth is the state that we're in currently in Thailand at the moment, domestic travel. So people are actually starting to go out, and when domestic travel reopened in the 8 locations surrounding the city of Bangkok, which is about 2 weeks ago, we saw a fast curve in terms of bookings from locals who wanted to actually just get out of the city, go to the beach, go to the mountain, and go and explore and etc. I actually tried to book a resort that my wife and I really enjoy going to, Wahin, and it's actually completely sold out until mid-July. So it's very good for their business, very sad for me. I've looked at other places too, and all the places I liked are actually pretty much booked at the moment. So good for Thailand, at least domestically, it's starting to recover. But what everyone is desperate in the industry at the moment is international travel. We all want to start to see international travel as soon as possible. You saw the numbers, the businesses are suffering. We ran a business impact survey across the region to find out what the businesses are being impacted with. The numbers we saw were dramatic. We saw that 65% of the respondents had zero plans in terms of crisis. They were not prepared for any type of crisis at all. 38% of these businesses only had money for 2 to 4 months, which means by now they're either bankrupt or very near to actually be closing down their business. 42% had already at the time, which is almost a month and a half ago, had already done a fair amount of layoff within their organization, or temporary breaks or layoffs, or no pay or reduced pay for their employees. And that number kept increasing over a period of time. We now see large organizations such as TripAdvisors and many others who have done considerable amount of layoff within their sector at the moment. So we definitely want actually to get the international travel again. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's different ways. You've heard it before, the bubbles, the corridors, the green zones, they're called different ways. We at PATA, when we initially started to talk about the current situation at a very early stage, we're referring to them as corridors. They're a good idea, but they're actually not easy to implement. It's not something that happens overnight. And the reason for this is you need a bilateral agreement between two nations, between two countries. And that bilateral agreement is based on trust. Trust that actually that the healthcare system in the respective countries can cope with a resurgence of cases, should there be any. Trust that actually there is proper health controls at entry and exit in the country. Whatever it is, temperature checks, COVID testing, health certificate or passport, which has been talked about before, and many of these other practices. And only when that level of trust is actually agreed, then processes can start in terms of planning for reopening. It also means that actually both countries either are COVID-free or very, very near getting to COVID-free in terms of planning. So Australia and New Zealand, that's already been discussed. They're planning to start in September. Planning obviously depends on how the situation will evolve. Baltic regions have already agreed their own. I've heard actually Singapore, Japan, Korea, China are actually talking about theirs also. Thailand, Vietnam, as far as I know, has not been at any discussions yet. I put it to be provocative because I believe it is necessary. It is also possible because Vietnam is COVID-free. Thailand is moving in that direction too. So if there's one corridor that could be open potentially in the next few weeks, certainly I would see Thailand and Vietnam as actually being probably the first one. Others within the region too. Obviously, our preference is, or actually, we don't want corridors. We want free flow of people traveling across the region, but we also need to think about the health of the citizens and the residents of the respective countries. So understanding what measures can be in place. Now, here's a list of measures. I won't read all of them. Most of them you already know, but just to give you an idea, contact tracing has been talked about in many areas. The use of masks and PPE, I think, is now accepted by everyone. It's kind of expected. You would actually wear one as you go into public areas. Distancing, cleaning and sanitizing, critical, obviously. Immunity passports, again, difficult to implement because we still don't fully understand COVID-19 and how it's actually being communicated, who's immune, who's a carrier, and etc. But potential. Touchless border control, a must. Putting your digit where everyone else is putting their digits before, nobody will want to do that anymore. Touchless check-in at hotels, again, same thing that actually many businesses are looking at. Hotels, attractions, shopping malls, restaurants, public areas, having some sanitization. I believe actually Thailand has done a pretty good job with that. in terms of public places and putting some of these processes. Now, there is one big question mark, and I don't know if the audience, so there's actually anyone who's actually working for travel insurance, but if you are, please reach out, because I have a million questions for you. Because at the moment, my understanding is that actually there are no single travel insurance that will cover you if you cross border, for two reasons. One, I'm not talking about COVID-19 specifically. I'm actually talking about you traveling to Singapore and falling up the stairs and broken your ankle. The insurance at the moment won't cover you, because as long as there's travel restrictions to you not to travel overseas, and as long as there's a pandemic declared by the World Health Organization, the majority of them actually will not actually cover you. So it's a big issue for business travel, obviously, because as corporations, I don't want my staff to travel overseas and being liable for them. And obviously for their own care at the same time too. I don't want to travel with my own family overseas if I know there's a risk I can get injured and actually end up with a huge bill, medical bill, depending on where you go. Now, I know that in Thailand, there's also been discussions about potentially covering the tourists as they come along, as it was done before a few years ago, when we had the political crisis in the country, where the government had said, you can still come to Thailand, even though the insurance won't cover you, we will take care of you. We're fortunate here in Thailand that we have a very, very good health care system. And I think that provides some forms of trust and reassurance in terms of potential travelers. But certainly an area that needs to be looked at. Hit the reset button. For those of you who may be working in a sector, you might have heard this a few times before. Hit reset, why? Because there are also discussions about, have we actually went a bit too far in terms of travel and tourism? Do we have too many crowded places? Again, talking pre-COVID, in terms of tourists. Have we forgotten about the protections of the environment, being more responsible, more sustainable? Should we have less, but have less visitors that spend more and distribute them more equally across the country to the secondary and tertiary regions within the country here? A process that Thailand has already started a few years ago. Now, we have an opportunity to actually redefine tourism as it should be. Now, the optimistic part of me are think actually that this is a great opportunity for us to do that, and I hope we can do some part of it. The realistic part of me is that we're actually suffering economically at the moment. Many businesses just want to get money in their pocket to pay their employees and restart again. So the tendency would be actually try to go back to what it was before, and mainly for economic pressure and economic reasons. But we all know that because of the situation is fast evolving, it probably won't happen for a number of years. Our forecast is that we will not go back to the same amount of growth we had pre-crisis in tourism until at least 2024. So we will see growth, we will see a return of travel and tourism. And I think if there's one country around Asia that has the potential to succeed and grow faster than any others, I would say Thailand, because this country is very resilient. The industry here in the country is resilient. People have a lot of trust and confidence in Thailand as a destination. Again, good healthcare system, very friendly environment, service oriented, and etc. People come to Thailand, don't come once. Once they come, they always come back. We have a joke within the industry. We call Thailand Teflon Thailand because it sticks with people. People want to come here and they keep returning every year, and they return obviously with their family, their friends, and encourage others to come back. So certainly great potential. I'm just going to close on a couple of things that we as an organization do that can be of use to some of you if you're either working in the sector or interested in the sector. We developed a few months ago a crisis resource center. It's very basic, but it offers information about the government resources. I was talked about before about the subsidies being offered to businesses within the sector, not only here in Thailand, but across the world. Under the government resources, you will find various countries and the list of subsidies that are actually being offered. Under the Tourism Recovery Monitor, you have a list of links to reputable and factual organization that actually provides data sets that are actually reliable. The World Health Organization, of course, and organizations like Forties, which I mentioned before, who do provide updates on a regular basis on statistics of what's going on in the industry. The impact survey is actually closed, but the results will actually be, the detailed results will be published, I believe it's next week or the week after. And then we also keep track of news. This resource is actually in the process of being upgraded to something much more significant and will become a permanent feature of our organization moving forward. The release of what I would call maybe version 2 of this site will be in first week of July, so in a couple of weeks' time. Something else we have been producing for many years already, is an annual forecast looking at the next 5 years in terms of growth of tourism or impact on tourism globally. We have a global forecast that we publish every year. And a few years ago, we started also to do individual countries reports that actually looks at the trends, where the source market in terms of tourism in the respective countries, what are the forecasts in terms of arrivals, where people come from. And obviously this year, they've all been updated to reflect the current situation in our forecast. It is summarized at the end of each report, and they're available on our website and etc. Finally, just to close, and I won't go through all the details of this, but something for I wanted to share with you. If you're actually, you don't have to work in travel and tourism to participate. If you're interested in traveling, if you want to be inspired about traveling to your next destination, if you want to know what are the cool things you can do, not only in Thailand, but across the region here, you can all join the Dream to Travel Festival. The link to the website is at the bottom. It's free to join. Invite your family, your friends to join in. It starts on June 22nd until July 17th. We will have daily activities that will be organized, live experiences, live cooking show, live musical performances. There'll be live tours of different places. And each week for 4 weeks, we have a different theme. First week is Thailand, and the theme is actually trust, which aligns with the marketing campaign of Thailand at the moment, which is rebuilding trust. The second week is about Malaysia, it's about courage. The third week is about well-being, which is Nepal. And the fourth week is Macau, about infinite possibilities. Throughout the week, we will have different activities that are organized, games, there'll be prizes to win, there'll be some live experiences, as I mentioned, that are organized. We have Catalonia and Sevilla in Spain, who will come in and organize some amazing experiences. I can't tell you what they are, but watch for it, because it'll be something that I'm really looking forward to participate. And the reason we're organizing this is our industry, as I mentioned before, has really suffered through this crisis, and people are really miss the interactions. David and I were talking about at the beginning, before everyone joined in, about the fact that we're all missing the human contact and not actually being in the office, meeting people, meeting friends. And as many other industries, we also organize lots of conferences and events. Well, obviously we can't have any this year, at least not for the moment. So we all end up doing something virtual, but we also wanted to go virtual and have interactions and have a bit of fun. And we'll have virtual coffee breaks and virtual happy hour. You have to bring your own drink, but you can still network and interact with people through a camera, to chat, and through some games and activities that we'll organize at the same time. So on that note, I will conclude, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardy. That was really, really fascinating as well. You know, I think the Dream to Travel initiative, that sounds a lot like what Dr. Kirida was mentioning with her CAP acronym. It sounds like you're dealing with the A quite well. I think when most people think of tourism and the tourism industry, it's obviously it's one of the sectors that's been hit the hardest by COVID-19. But you know, kudos on coming up with a really interesting initiative and adjusting to the situation, you know, as best we can. I think it sounds really interesting, and I'll look into that and try and get signed up so I can join you for a virtual coffee break or a virtual happy hour afterwards.
Yeah, I was telling people yesterday that actually you have to consider the festival, like for anyone who's ever been to Montreal to Canada, which is where I'm from, we have the Jazz Festival, which is world recognized and etc. It's kind of similar. You sign up for a pass to the festival, you have access to all the activities for the entire month, and you create your own calendar as to what you really want to participate. So anyway, you're all welcome to join in.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting, and it probably will, get people interested in traveling again. I know there's probably a lot of pent up demand. So as soon as the COVID situation improves, I'm sure there's going to be some people who just will be very eager to get out in real life as well. There's been quite a few questions that have come in. So for everybody who's attending, thank you very much for sending in the ones that have come in. If you have more questions, please feel free to ask them anytime. I'll try to intersperse them just to keep the discussion going. So we have about another 30 minutes or so. So I'm not going to break it into 15 minutes of David's questions and 15 minutes of questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please write them in, and I'll try to get to them as quickly as I can. So my first question is, kind of to both of you, and that's, obviously the intersection of both of your presentations. I mean, tourism is a vital part of Thailand's economy, obviously, and it was pre-COVID, and now obviously everything's sort of dormant. So I guess my question is to ask you to kind of, get out your crystal ball and try to predict a little bit, and just think, what do you think Thailand's tourism industry is going to look like, let's say over the next 5 years? I know, Dr. Hardy, you spoke about it a little bit, but maybe you can give some kind of specific examples. How are things going to change?
Yeah, I think in terms of numbers, I'm just quoting the government numbers at the moment, who we're forecasting, 38 plus million visitors, which is numbers that Thailand had last year. We're originally hoping to reach 40 million visitors this year. And at the moment, the forecast is more around 12 million. So that actually shows you, and the reason it actually still seems pretty high is because we had a first good quarter before everything really actually started to be closed down in lockdown and et cetera. And there's still hope and anticipation that the Q3 and Q4 will start to pick up again. And so that's kind of what we're actually forecasting. But one thing that actually the entire industry agrees on is that when we look at the scenario, if you imagine a straight line, and initially what we expected is, domestic travel. We're in that phase at the moment, and we expect this obviously will continue for a period of time. There's only 8 destinations around Bangkok that are actually currently open for domestic tourism. Others will start to reopen as the weeks go by, and people will start to actually travel. The domestic flights will start again, and then within the country will start to travel. Regional travel is expected from mid-July is when actually flights will actually start again in Thailand, at least regionally, for the first part. I know that there was a question that I saw about the exact routes, and I actually do not know the answer to that question at the moment. I know that regional travel is the first part that actually is being looked at. The first people that will travel will be business travel and individuals and families. But mass tourism, the large groups of travel from China and from other places that Thailand was so famous about, I don't expect that these will come back in 2020. And they may come back in 2021 at a much, much later stage. I don't anticipate they'll come in masses again. So initially there's a few challenges. There's rebuilding confidence and trust is the most critical part. The travel insurance, which is something that many people ignore, are actually also very important to that aspect of it. But then it's actually all the protocols that are in place. Protocols at hotels, which Thailand has already established and actually well implemented. Restaurants, shopping malls, that's all been done already. So we're in a good position. We've already done that difficult part. The next part, which is a little bit more tricky, is the airport, the air travel in the airport, and the testing that will be required at departures and arrival, and how will this be tracked moving forward. Many organizations, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, IATA, ACI, those are all acronyms that are actually people working specifically in the aviation sector for airports and airlines, have all already established their own protocols. So now it's a question of the countries and the airlines and the airport to putting the machines and the necessary steps in the airports and the airlines to be able to ensure the safety of the travelers moving forward. So it will be progressive. I certainly expect that, I certainly hope there will not be a massive second wave in the fall, as some scientists have forecasted. But travel will progressively restart again within the region here. We need it. We really need it.
It's interesting to hear your points on that because, you know, I think every day in the Nation or the Bangkok Post, there's some news story about how, you know, it's going to be a bit of a, I guess there's a lot of speculation going about what tourism is going to look like. And I think the answer that somebody like me gets is nobody really knows. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on this since you're obviously deeply involved. Dr. Kirita, what do you think about, you know, the tourism sector in terms of its importance in Thailand's economy over the next, let's say, 5 years, or maybe even looking forward? Do you think it will still retain the same significance, or are you, you know, I know it's difficult to foresee, but are you looking at a potential decline in tourism or you know, boosting up of different economic sectors as a result, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think I share Mario's view that it will take time before the tourism will recover, because international tourism, as Mario has mentioned, you know, will take time, and activities will not resume back to normal unless there is a vaccine and, you know, everybody's comfortable going out again. Countries are comfortable receiving tourists. So that will not be until maybe 2022. So, you know, that, you know, will take quite some time. But meanwhile, as Mario mentioned, you know, there could be, you know, relaxation here and there, you know, to sort of slowly open up. But the full opening up would not be until, you know, a vaccine is found. But again, you know, after even, you know, people are vaccinated and they're comfortable, they might not want to travel as much in the beginning because of, you know, the slump in their incomes, you know, during the COVID period. Mm-hmm. So they want to save, you know, a bit more before they can start traveling the way they could, you know, in the past before. So I wouldn't expect travel or tourism into Thailand to recover until probably later, you know, in 2022. And this is assuming that, you know, economic activities can resume as normal by the end of 2021. So, you know, that's the assumption that we have. And again, I just want to add some numbers to what Mario has said in terms of domestic tourism. I mean, I think increasingly we will be encouraging, you know, more and more domestic tourism, which is good. But again, the relative size of domestic tourism versus international tourism is quite different. As I mentioned to you earlier, that international tourism brings in around 12% of GDP, right, into the country. Domestic tourism, you know, is around 6% of GDP. And so what I've kind of computed is that those Thais who have been traveling, who used to travel abroad, and if they couldn't travel abroad now, they might be traveling in Thailand instead. That's only around 2.5% of Thai GDP. So it's small. It's small. So it would not, you know, cancel out the negative effects of the slump in international tourism. So we still have to wait, you know, as Mario mentioned, until international tourism can fully rebound again. And that I don't think will be until the end of 2022. Now you asked about 5 years going forward. I still think that Thailand is a good destination. It's a favorite destination for many people. So as their incomes recover and as their safety, you know, concerns, you know, die down, and of course Thailand has, you know, fingers crossed, knock on wood, is able to maintain our good reputation in dealing with this pandemic. I'm sure, you know, we will receive tourists back into Thailand, but that would be in 2023, 24, 25, that would happen. But I also think there is a new opportunity that arises in terms of tourism in Thailand. That's medical tourism, because Thailand now has also built its name for, you know, having a good health system. And of course, you know, we already have a very, very good and friendly medical service. So, you know, that might be another group of tourists that could come in to Thailand post-COVID. That's for medical tourism.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions that came in as well. So thanks very much for addressing that one as well on medical tourism. I mean, I guess that's a you know, a good segue. Is that how you know, what are the opportunities, I suppose, in Thailand's tourism sector, you know, in terms of transitioning going forward? I think Mario mentioned a little bit about, you know, a reset button and trying to find new opportunities from an economic perspective. So what areas from let's say a policy perspective should the Thai government be promoting in your view, Dr. Kirita?
No, I would think, well, medical tourism, definitely, that is one, and these are also higher value added tourism as well. in terms of, people coming, they stay, they spend quite a bit more than, those who come for a few days backpacking, for example.
Right.
So I think in the next phase, we could definitely promote more of the medical tourism. We could promote more as this is a safe place to come. You can come with your families, right? So this is more like a family destination rather than just coming, one or two persons with a backpack. And of course, family travels would add also, they spend more, they add more value to the traveler they come as well. So I think there are opportunities if we actually look carefully into what strength Thailand has gained in this pandemic and convert that, this crisis into an opportunity later on.
And what do you think, Dr. Hardy? Are there any other, kind of high-end sort of tourism opportunities for those working in Thailand's tourism sector? I mean, other than medical tourism, I know there's probably, other areas where a shift can occur, but what are your views on that?
Yeah, in some of the surveys we conducted, we've asked people about, how do they actually see travel or tourism in the future? Well, what are they expecting when they will travel moving forward post-COVID, or once treatments or measures are in place that people can actually travel overseas and et cetera? And in terms of what mostly people will be looking for, are looking for already, when you look at TripAdvisors and other platforms, what people are searching for, they're actually not looking for these massive resorts with thousands of people. They're actually looking for these boutique resorts. So they're smaller, when there's less people, less crowded environment, less city travel, more countryside or beach area, but in much smaller resorts than before. They're looking for reassurance that these places obviously have got clean processes and sanitization in place, and et cetera, to provide confidence that they'll be safe as they actually enjoy their holiday. They're looking for more nature-based activities also, again, outside of main cities. Essentially, what people want to do is avoid big crowds, and people like myself who actually spent 3 months on a 24th floor of a high-rise building. I just want to get out into nature again, whatever ways I can. And I suspect that this is actually something that, at least throughout our survey, we've also seen what actually people are expecting moving forward. So travel behaviors and patterns will actually be changing moving forward. We're already seeing it in terms of what they're searching for.
Fair enough. Well, I have a few questions for Dr. Kirita, sort of non-tourism related, but Dr. Hardy, you're welcome to join in and give me your thoughts as well. One of the issues I think that, I guess looking at it from a macroeconomic perspective, that I think a lot of people are wondering about, in terms of opportunities for Thailand, would be, regionally, all the other issues that are occurring in nearby countries. So last year, when demonstrations started to occur in Hong Kong, for instance, there was a lot of talk about Bangkok maybe absorbing some of the jobs from multinationals who would potentially leave Hong Kong. I don't know how realistic that was, but that was a little bit of the discussion that was happening. I'm not really sure if we've seen any types of influx there, but just thinking about this type of example, so how COVID-19 has impacted regionally, well, not even COVID-19, but let's say, for instance, there's a question actually in the queue from discussing about the U.S.-China trade disputes and how that might actually impact Thailand. So I wonder if you could just give your thoughts about that, about what you think in a post-COVID world, how regional issues might actually impact Thailand's economy.
No, definitely. I mean, the U.S.-China trade war has started to, impact the world, since 2 years ago. And with the COVID-19 at the moment, as I mentioned in my presentation, it has sort of, been a wake-up call for many who have not woken up. If they have not woken up during the China or U.S.-China trade war, I mean, now they've definitely woken up that we can't rely on China as much as we used to anymore. We need to diversify, our sourcing of raw materials. We might need to relocate our, production capacity out of China, especially for markets that are not in China. So I think this will actually have a big impact on the global supply chains of the world, as I mentioned in my presentation. I mean, that's definitely one thing that is happening. You did mention a bit about the Hong Kong, tension as well. actually that has also prompted a lot of business people from Hong Kong or even Taiwan who are investing in China to decide to move out of China as well. So it's not only because of Chinese wages going up or the US-China trade war or the COVID, but political relationships between these countries have also affected companies' decisions to move out of China. And of course, you know that there's a lot of Hong Kong and Taiwanese investors in China. So those that are moving out of China are not only Chinese companies, they are Hong Kong, Taiwan, and also American and Japanese companies as well, and then South Korean companies as well. So I think that we'll see. One of the other things I think was interesting when there was the Hong Kong China dispute, many of the Chinese home buyers or investors, I'm not sure, who used to buy a lot of property in China have looked for alternative destinations. And this was about a year ago when Thailand has started to benefit from these Chinese investors as well. So the property sector in Thailand also had some positive impacts from these disputes, being that the Chinese investors or buyers of properties have looked in elsewhere. I mean, a lot of them go to Australia, but now Australia is also putting on some restrictions on buying a property by Chinese. So they have looked at Thailand, and many of them have bought property in Thailand as well. So there are opportunities to be seized from all these crises.
Oh, yeah, I think that's probably a good summation of all the different. I mean, it's certainly a crazy times that we're living in. So it's certainly a good way to summarize some of the different the impacts from different issues that are impacting us locally anyway. Another question that's come up that was one of mine as well, so I figure it's a good opportunity for me to ask, is regarding the CPTPP. So Canada is a member of the CPTPP, and there's plenty of news stories right now in the press here in Thailand about different private sector bodies that are advocating for it, and there's certainly some in the in Thailand who are advocating against it, and the government is thinking about what decision to make. What are your views in terms of Thailand acceding to the CPTPP and what impact that could have in terms of boosting investment and trade?
Oh, no, I mean, definitely since the TPP times, I mean, TDRI has been doing research on this, and we have suggested from then that accessing the TPP would bring, more benefits than cost to Thailand. So it would benefit more than harm Thailand. But of course, sectors that are negatively affected, has to be taken care of, right? Whether it's agriculture or, pharmaceuticals. I mean, they would have to be, focused on and taken care of. But in the big picture, Thailand would have a net benefit from joining the TPP. Now, with the US, leaving the TPP and now it's CPTPP, we did another study and it still shows a similar result that Thailand will still have a net, benefit from joining the CPTPP, although it might be less because the US is not there and US is one of our big trading partners. But in this world where, there is more protectionism, and this is one thing that will definitely come about in the post-COVID world that I didn't mention, is protectionism. Because as countries' economies, decline, they tend to be more protectionistic. And this is obvious, in the past crises as well. I mean, if you look back into the Great Depression, that was what happened as well. Tariffs get racked up, post any depression or recession at this global scale. So given that protectionism will rise, I mean, it's important for a small, open economy like Thailand to have these trade agreements so that we can still ensure access to different markets.
Right. Moving to a slightly different topic, and this one this question is for Dr. Hardy. Just discussing the travel bubbles, I think you touched on the difficulty, I think, in implementing a travel bubble or a travel zone or whatever you want to call it in practice. Thailand and Vietnam are two countries that regionally we're nearby each other, and Vietnam might be a little bit ahead of Thailand, but we've had similar success in containing the virus, and hopefully that will last. I guess my question is, how easy will it be to actually implement these bubbles? I mean, given the types of agreement that needs to be reached between the different governments. And then I guess, assuming that it would be easy, what countries should Thailand be seeking to form bubbles with, assuming that, you know, those countries have their situation under control? I mean, what are the ideal countries that Thailand should really be focused on encouraging travel to and from?
Yeah, I think at the moment, you know, you look at Vietnam would obviously be a good option. Cambodia will probably would likely follow after that. I would put a question mark on Myanmar because there's a little bit of uncertainty in the clarity of their testing and COVID-19 at the moment, but potentially. Singapore still has a lot of concerns with COVID-19 at the moment, but are actually gradually starting to discuss bubbles because they know it takes a bit of time with other countries. So I think it would probably be a very good addition moving forward. The one that is actually a big question mark for me and could have a significant impact on the tourism sector here in Thailand would be a bubble with China. Because if you consider that the size, the volume of Chinese coming to Thailand on a yearly basis pre-COVID-19 is significant. It is a lot. Now, about 2 months ago, we conducted an extensive survey with millions of Chinese across China about their desire to travel overseas and what they were looking for and etc. There was already at the time an extreme desire to go and travel as they did before. Now, I asked this question to an economist in China. I said, yes, but aren't they being affected by the current economic crisis too? Will they have the means to travel? He said, don't worry about means. They said the way Chinese behave is they actually have a stockpile. So when they actually travel, their holidays are not financed by their earnings. They're actually financed by their savings. And he said, so their savings are actually still there. And in terms of spending, they will still travel. They might make different choices in where they will go and how much they will spend and how far they will go, for example. But when we also asked them what are the top destinations or their mind to travel overseas, Thailand was number one. It was the highest in terms of their desire to go and escape China for a holiday, to travel somewhere. Thailand was still at the very top of the desire to places to go. Now, there's a lot of questions about health controls and measures in terms of people from China coming to Thailand and vice versa and etc. But if there was a mean to actually control the health and reassure the population in terms of the controls that are being put in place, economically, that would certainly be the country that I would look at in terms of reopening. But I do put some cautions around the health part that needs to be looked at.
No, it's really very interesting. I mean, the idea of the travel bubble, I think with China, I mean, in terms of, you know, you're right, it raises a number of issues, but understood completely about, you know, there's certainly a lot of pent up demand, I'm sure, within China to revisit Thailand soon in the near future. I want to touch on a subject which is kind of, I suppose, you know, intersects both of your talks as well, and that would be, you know, the businesses and trade show type tourism. So, you know, Thailand has a number of venues that can host large conferences and large trade shows. There's a number of hotels, obviously, in Bangkok that hold, you know, large international, you know, internationally focused events, and those have all obviously had to be paused. I wonder if you could speak at all if there's any indication about this aspect. I mean, it's not really travel for leisure; it's travel for business purposes, and not just, you know, simple, I suppose, business travel, but more, you know, trade show focus. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how quickly this will rebound after the pandemic. It's for either of you first, I suppose, Dr. Hardy.
I'll start and I'll ask Dr. Kurita to comment afterwards. Our office, we're in the same building as TCEP, the Thai Convention Exhibition Bureau. We're just one floor apart. And they're one of our partners, and we meet on a regular basis. Even throughout the crisis, we had regular discussions about the current situation in the future. In terms of moving forward for events, I love working with TCEP because they're one of the most creative agencies that actually we work with, and as well as the Thai Authority of Thailand, TAT, in terms of finding new ways and concepts to reopen events. They've already put some protocols in place. They're in terms of social distancing at events, reducing the size of the events, but still having them moving forward. Some of the controls are actually being in terms of entering the facilities, exit of facilities, and all of this has already been planned. So they're already organized in terms of reopening. Their focus at the moment is mostly with domestic exhibition and events and activities. In 2021, probably not so much in 2020, more of a regional focus in terms of events and activities, in terms of events and large gathering, if you like, in terms of getting people together. And international or long haul in terms of big, massive group as we had before, I'd say are probably much later into 2021. At least that's the expectations we have for the time being. I did a podcast about 2 weeks ago with Informa. Informa is actually the largest event exhibition business in the world. I used to work for them before. It used to be called United Business Media, UBM. And asked them about the future of events. This will actually virtual events be the future, or will people gather again together? And we had a consensus between the two of us, which is shared between a lot of people, that there's a great desire for people to have that human contact again, to go back into an event. You can't, when you go to a conference or an event, you have this moment where you meet somebody you would not have met in any other ways, in any other places. Just a pure coincidence, and you start building relationship and business that you can't really do in a virtual world. I used to spend most of my time speaking at conferences, and the frustration for me to attend events like this one, for example, and any others, is that when there's a very large group, sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of people, I cannot actually feel people's emotions. So I'm actually speaking, and I don't know if they're actually falling asleep, if they're laughing, if they're enjoying themselves, if they're learning something. And looking at the questions or the feedback is actually distracting, specifically when you're speaking, which is not something you can do. So I do believe that there is a demand, there will be a demand for, again, having these events, how they will happen, and what process will need to be put in place to ensure the safety of people, and et cetera. I think there's already a lot of creativity around that area to put those in place to get us together again, but possibly in smaller size. But I'd certainly love to hear from Dr. Kurita also her thoughts on that.
I don't have much to add, actually, because Dr. Hardy is the expert here. I know that there have been, beginning of initiatives of what they call the bilateral travel, business travel protocols, right, between like China and Taiwan and a few other countries, where short business trips are allowed without having to quarantine yourselves in both countries, but you would need medical certificates from your country, and once you get into the destination country, then you get checked again for Corona-19, and if you pass, then you can stay for 5 to 7 days. So that has already started, but on a very limited scale. So I would be delighted if Dr. Hardy's I would call projections come true, that in the future this could be expanded to a whole large group who are coming for events, not just for business meetings.
Well, thanks very much to both of you for your insights on that one. We're running a little bit short on time, but I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So there was one question that came in early, and I had a similar thought as well. So it's to you, Dr. Kirida, talking about government policy. So you mentioned in your presentation that the Thai government is allocating around 1 trillion baht, I believe it was, and of that, I think around 400 billion was towards specific programs for developing regions. Now, the question that's come in is that some of that money is actually going to run out soon, and so I guess the question is, what is the government policy afterwards? And this actually, the reason why I wanted to ask this one as well is because my wife is actually American, and many people I think if you follow American news from a few months back, you know, they passed a huge stimulus plan, and one of the initiatives was mailing every American a check. So my wife got a check in the mail, even though she's not even living in the United States, which is quite silly whenever it comes to public policy, if you ask me, since, you know, this is obviously not going to help the American economy all that much. So I'm wondering, you know, if you have any thoughts whenever it comes to how the government could wisely use stimulus funding in order to improve Thailand's economy. Big question for, you know, 2 or 3 minutes, but please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the question. Just to quickly, you know, give you a picture. I mean, the 1 trillion baht that the government has now agreed to borrow to stimulate the economy, 600 billion will be used for mostly cash handouts, and a little bit of that for the healthcare sector, while the other 400 billion will be used for project-based investments in villages and communities. So you know, the big debate that's going on right now is that, you know, the 400 billion baht will need to have, you know, proposals, terms of references, and it gets approval. So it might be slow. Well, you know, people really need, you know, cash injections right now. So that was, you know, the criticism. So the government tried to resolve that by saying, oh, you need to give us, you know, your proposals and TORs and everything by the end of this month. So when that happens, it presents another issue, being that the timeline is too tight. So what happens is that the central agencies then try to propose projects that were already in their pipelines, you know, because they already have the proposals and TORs for those. While as new projects that would actually address the issues of those in the villages, for example, they might need, you know, new healthcare centers, or, you know, they might need some other, you know, assistance because, you know, tourism is down in their village. That will not happen because you know, they don't have a project ready for that, right? So the criticism is that, yes, you might get some money down into the villages and communities, but you know, the outcome or even the output might not be what the villages or the community members, you know, would like to see. So that's, you know, one criticism. But of course, as I mentioned, there's another 600 billion baht pot, which could be used for cash handouts. But even so, I saw one of the questions saying that, you know, this will this be enough, right? I mean, if this lasts for another 1.5 years or 2, and unemployment numbers go up to 2 million, you know, people, as the Bank of Thailand has forecasted, of course, this will not be enough. I would expect a second, you know, round of stimulus that would come about. As I mentioned in my presentation, I mean, this first round is only 6% of GDP. It's quite small, you know, and they can increase it up to 12 or 15% of GDP, and that would still keep our public debt levels manageable. So I would think maybe the next phase either would be more cash handouts, or now it would be assisting businesses. So that they could survive and they could keep their employees, you know, rather than helping just individuals.
Thank you very much for that, and well done on summarizing those issues in such a shorter amount of time. I think our time has actually come to an end here, so I'd just like to thank Dr. Kirita as well as Dr. Hardy for taking the time to speak this afternoon. I think it was incredibly insightful. I was jotting down questions the entire time while you were speaking, and we got some great questions from the audience. And I think I ended up asking, you know, maybe about 5 or 10% of them. So I think we could go on for hours speaking about these issues. But I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your afternoon to come in and inform our audience on these points. So thank you again. And I'll pass it over to Kun Jen just to give some final remarks on behalf of CanCham.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Dr. Kirita and Mario, again, for providing very comprehensive and insightful presentations regarding the Thailand economics and in-depth analysis on the tourism sector. Lastly, I thank you everyone for joining us today for the webinar sessions. So we have the upcoming events for CanCham Thailand on June 25 about the crisis communications business talk, and also Connect Connection networking. July 1st, we aim to do the first virtual Canada Day event in Bangkok, and including all the regions, CanCham in the region as well. So we will do that. So stay tuned on CanCham website. We will send out the invitations for both events soon. So, all right, thank you everyone for your time joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank youครับ
Bye.
Thank you.